A while ago, I was listening to a sermon, and a pastor told a story about two college basketball players. And these both guys were very talented, and they planned on having great careers in the NBA. And one time in the summer, when their college basketball season was not going, they signed up to play in a league overseas. And this league was a great stepping point into the next level of their game, and they were really excited about this opportunity. And these two huge basketball players went to the airport, and they went to their gate, and their flight was canceled. And they were so frustrated. I mean, this was a long flight, and now they were going to have to wait in the airport for a long time for the next flight, and that was going to mess up their whole schedule with all their connecting flights in foreign countries where they didn't even know the languages. And these guys were really stressed out and actually had a bad attitude. They were really good athletes, and they were used to kind of things being brought to them, and they were very frustrated. Well, finally they the next flight was available, and they're able to get onto their flight. And they had both picked exit row seats when they had picked their tickets. And for some reason, the airline had messed up their tickets, and they got put in the very back of the plane in these tiny little seats. You know, those ones right up against the wall where you can't even lean backwards. Well, I'm not a super tall guy, and I feel cramped in those. And can you imagine what these basketball players who are almost 7 feet tall and, you know, big muscles, they could barely fit in these seats. And they were kind of grumbling and complaining, and they sat in those seats. I mean, they squeezed into those seats in the back. And right before the plane left the gate and started to taxi, one of the flight attendants saw them and was just like, okay, this is wrong. We are going to be on like a 9-hour flight. No way, this is not going to happen. And so, because she was the head stewardess, she had a little bit of sway, and she leaned over to the two men and said, "Gentlemen, would you like a different seat in first class?" And they were like, "Yes, ma'am, we would." And they got up and they walked to the front of the plane, and they were able to sit in the very front plane. And their seats leaned way back, and they had tons of leg room, even for guys who were 6'10 and 6'11. And they were brought some special food and some nice drinks. And they looked at each other and they said, "I am so glad that our first flight got canceled. I am so glad that we're not sitting in an exit row, because we have twice as much leg room here." And they kind of gave each other a little fist bump and were like, "We've got a great life." Well, the flight took off, and a couple hours into the flight, they're somewhere out over the ocean, and they're sleeping because missing the flight. It's been nighttime, and so they're not really awake, and this was in planes before they had tons of in-flight movies and TV, and so they're sleeping, and then all of a sudden the plane takes a nosedive. And this wasn't just like a little turbulence where you're like, "Oh, my tummy feels funny." I mean, this was like, oh my goodness, the plane is crashing, and the plane jerked back up and twisted to one side, and then like people who were walking in the aisles going to the bathroom like fell over. People's drinks were getting splashed. Everyone was awake. I mean, this looked like it was going to be the end. People were crying and praying, and the two guys in the front were just like, "Oh my goodness, this is crazy." And they started to pray, and then all of a sudden they heard some commotion in the cabin right in front of them where the pilot is, like some yelling. And they were like, "Oh my goodness, it sounds like there's a fight going on in there." And so the guys jumped up and they tried to open the door, but it had been locked from the inside. And as they were standing there right next to the door, like, they could hear the pilot calling for help, and something bad was going on in there. And so these two massive athletes with adrenaline pumping in them broke down the door to get into the cockpit. And when they ripped open that door, they saw some crazy terrorist with the pilot in a headlock trying to crash the plane. He had pushed the stick all the way forward, and the plane was nosediving They can actually see the water getting closer and closer and pick out individual waves. And it took like 3 seconds for these two massive athletes to grab this crazy terrorist, to rip him off of the pilot, to slam him on the ground. The pilot, fortunately, was able to pull the plane up from its steep nosedive, and they were able to save the plane before it crashed into the waves. And those two basketball players, those two heroes, saved every single person on that plane. And it was all because they missed their first flight. You see, as Christians, as humans, whenever something bad happens in our life, our first reaction is to just blame God. Why, God? Why? I mean, you're so big and powerful. Why did you let this happen? And we do that for little things like missing flights, or for big things like coronavirus. But God sees a bigger picture than us. And maybe something is uncomfortable in your life because he's trying to train you or to strengthen your character. Or maybe something bad in your life is happening just because we live in a bad world where bad things happen. Or maybe you missed the flight because your opportunity to be a hero, to save lives, is on the next flight. And if your plans worked out just the way that you wanted them to, you would miss your destiny. We don't know the future. We don't know the details, the ins and outs, the whys and why nots. And Christians get in trouble when they try to explain God's ways like they understand everything. That's why Jesus and Peter and Paul and John always say, you just got to live by faith. Why did I miss my flight? I don't know, but God's got this. Why did I get sick? I don't know, but God's got this. Why did I lose my job? Why is the economy the way it is? Why? I don't know, but God's got this. Just think of all the stress we would miss out in our lives if the next time we missed a flight, we sat back and said, you know what? God's got this. May God bless you today. Share this video with someone who needs some encouragement. Have a good day, because no matter what you're sitting in and what you're looking at, God's got this. God bless.